Are your anti-aging strategies working? Well, stay tuned to find out with our guest, Chris Mirabile.
You're listening to Live Foreverish, a show dedicated to helping you live just a little longer. Here's your hosts, Dr. Mike and Dr. Crystal Gossard.
All right, welcome to Live Foreverish. Dr. Crystal, how's your anti-aging strategies going so far today?
I think that they are great. People are often shocked when they hear my age. I do not welcome questions about my age, but
I won't say a word.
I think they're working well.
I know
I've taken different aging tests. I haven't had any
So you're doing pretty good on
chemical analysis, biological analysis, but I think so. I lead a pretty healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, you did. No,
I've never
there's
smoked.
no doubt.
Fit.
Yeah, you definitely are doing
Eat the right
stuff.
things.
Yeah, you're doing.
I sleep.
Yeah, that's good. I sleep well too. So, again, we're Live Forever-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Our goal is to live maybe a little longer, but a whole lot stronger, right? And now some people really want to live a lot longer too, and that's fine. That's their goals.
yeah.
Nothing wrong with that.
Well, I mean, a few healthy, good age where, you have a good quality of life. I don't want to live longer and
not be able to do nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I agree. So we're going to be talking about just aging, longevity in general. We're going to be talking about biological age versus chronological age. And we have a guest who's going to come on because, he's gone through a lot in his health journey. And he's become, very, very knowledgeable of these things, these longevity things that we like to measure now. And so we're going to bring on Chris Mirabile. He's a globally recognized expert and public speaker on longevity and aging. He's the founder and CEO of NOVOS, a consumer longevity biotech company. That's pretty cool. He brings passion and knowledge rooted in his own inspiring journey, having survived a brain tumor at 16. It's pretty big. And his mission is to make longevity accessible for everyone. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's just get into this. Our audience they like to get right into it, Chris. What's biological age, and how is that different from chronological?
Great question. So we all know what chronological age is, right? This is how many birthdays you've had, how many times the Earth has revolved around the sun, right? This is the amount of time that has passed. Biological age, on the other hand, is a measure of how old you are from a biological perspective. And there's different ways that we can define this depending on essentially who you're talking to and what methodology that they're following. But I think the easiest way to think of it is that I'll give a very common experience that we all have, is that we all know that 50-year-old who looks like they're 40, and we know that 50-year-old who looks like they're 60 or 70, right? So that's just something that is a outward manifestation of their whole body health. Oftentimes, how somebody looks is actually a representation of how healthy they have been throughout their lifetime. And so intuitively, we know some people are going to age faster than others. But there's actually technical ways that we can measure this. And there are different types of tests. For example, there's this whole field of science called omics. And within omics, you've got your genomics, right? Your genetics. People are very aware of genetics now. But then beyond genetics, what else comes after that? Well, after genetics, you've got epigenetics. After epigenetics, you've got transcriptomics. After transcriptomics, you've got proteomics. And then from there, you've got metabolomics. So this is a whole field of study. This is very big in the field of biogerontology, which is the scientific discipline of studying the biological process of aging and trying to understand it so that we can slow it down. And within each of these omics, there are ways to try to understand and measure one's biological age. The most popular one to date so far, that has the most research behind it so far, is the field of epigenetics. So let me explain quickly what epigenetics are, unless you'd like to jump in the meantime.
No, I think
we wanted to go through this, right? Because our next
Yeah.
question was, how do you measure all this stuff?
Right.
So use that as an example and what you're measuring there and how that impacts someone's biological age. That's great.
Sure. So if you think about your genes are kind of like a piano. And the piano, if you imagine those keys, they're hard coded. It's not something you can easily just change, right? So assume that your genetics are permanent. Obviously, there's technologies like CRISPR where we're starting to see that there are ways to change certain genes. But let's, for the sake of argument, say that you cannot change your genes at all. So that's permanent. What you can change is your epigenetic expression. So what is that? So if your genes are the piano, your epigenome is the piano player. It's the piano player who's deciding what music to play on your genes. So we have all of these genes that are there to react to our environment, right? So a quick example, if you go out into the sun, you have genes that are going to take those UV rays as a signal to produce melanin. So the melanin producing genes are being turned on as you spend more and more time out into the sun. That's an example of epigenetic expression. You have the gene, it's hard coded, but whether it's on or off is going to be based on some sort of stimulus.
Great analogy.
So, and just to go, like, I don't want to overcomplicate it, but the reason I said piano player rather than music is because the piano player is deciding what keys to play, but the music itself, you can think of that as the proteome. The proteome being proteins that are produced. Because if you think about high school biology, we learned that our DNA exists for the sake of producing proteins. That's all that our DNA does, is it produces proteins. It is an instruction manual for our body to produce proteins. So the music itself would be the proteome. Now, going back to biological age, bringing it all back home, there are different patterns that emerge in our epigenome. In other words, which genes are turned on and off. And scientists have been able to use different computation methods like machine learning. And in scientific studies, looking at the healthiest people, the least healthy people, those who get different types of diseases, those who don't. And with all of this data, they're able to identify which patterns emerge within our epigenome of genes being on or off that are associated with the healthiest people and the least healthy people and everything else in between. So what we can then do is approximate one's biological age, which if you get down to it, a biological age is a much more accurate way for us to approximate your risk of disease and your risk of mortality. And I would also go as far as saying your quality of life measures, so your ability to think and to be physically active and your heart health and ability to run up a flight of steps, right? These are quality of life markers. It is much more accurate than your chronological age, because you could be 70 chronologically, but biologically 50, and that means your risk of death is multiple times lower than the average 70-year-old.
I love that that explanation. That was very clear, and I'm happy that you brought in the concept of, or the reality, when we're talking about longevity and aging, we're really talking about diseases associated with aging, diseases that come about through age, or maybe diseases that may cause you to have accelerated aging. So I think that's kind of a good point for people to understand. It's not just about living longer, it's about being your overall state of health, which can translate to many other things. But I'm wondering, when we look at this information, what are some limitations? Like, I think you kind of went over what it can tell us. What is it not telling us? Like, what are limitations with kind of measuring biological age?
That's a fantastic question. And this is an ongoing question even within the scientific community. We haven't fully determined the how far reaching the epigenetic way of measuring biological age, how far reaching that actually is and what its limitations are. What I would say is that when we think about aging, we've identified as a scientific community what's known as the 12 mechanisms of aging. So the mechanism being like a breakdown of the biological processes that are taking place that lead to aging in the first place. And so some of them are very familiar, like mitochondrial dysfunction and stem cell rejuvenation. Some of them are less commonly known, like loss of proteostasis or dysregulated epigenome. And so the epigenome is one of the stronger of the 12 mechanisms of aging. It is what Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard really focuses on with his cellular reprogramming and this idea of trying to coerce the epigenome to be a younger version of itself using something called Yamanaka factors that the Nobel Prize was given out for. But to that point, Dr. Sinclair has this perspective called the information theory of aging. It's basically saying that his theory is that we start to age because, much like a CD that has data on it, but it can get scratched, our epigenome is like the scratches. It's starting to have genes turn on that shouldn't turn on and genes turn off that shouldn't turn off. And if that is 100% the reason why we age, then the epigenome is actually, to your question, telling us a tremendous amount. But many other scientists say, nope, it's much more complicated than that. Although we believe in the epigenetic and perspective on aging and the information theory of aging, there are other things, more macro things that are taking place within our bodies as well. So it's interesting because the epigenome can largely reflect our phenotype. So the way that we actually exist in this world, like the manifestation of everything, who we are today in terms of our health and capabilities. It can reflect it, but it can also lead to it as well. So the short answer to your question, I would say, is that it is one of the most powerful ways to measure it, but it's not the be all end all. And that's why, for example, on my website, when I log the different tests, I'm doing physiological markers like my VO2 max as an example.
Yeah.
I'm looking at other ways that we can approximate my biological age and seeing if they're all converging to approximately the same age or if there are outliers. And if there are outliers, then I start to dig in to understand why is that an outlier.
Yeah.
Okay. And just one quick question related to that, just to clarify a more specific question. When you're saying measuring epigenetics, are you talking like methylation patterns
Exactly.
or is there a different mechanism?
Nope, you got it. So
Okay.
the epigenome, yeah. So when a gene is methylated, you're basically turning off that gene. And when you demethylate it, imagine like your genes being wrapped around a spindle. When it's demethylated, you can now read everything on that string. And that is your DNA code. So it's whether you're methylated or demethylated. Exactly.
Okay.
So there are some longevity researchers and scientists that would say that biological age is correlated to a longer lifespan. And there's even some large cohort studies that support that. But then there's other specialists that would say, well, you have to have a better appreciation for the nuance of lifespan studies. Just kind of like what you were mentioning, that there may be more macro things going on just than the epigenetics. So where do you fall in that? Are you convinced that that a biological age or a lower biological age will mean that someone's going to live more years?
Another great question. So we need to look at this in context. When these epigenetic tests were created, the inventor of the epigenetic test is Dr. Steve Horvath, who's actually a mathematician by trade and went into biology. It was originally created as a chronological age estimator. So looking at the epigenome and trying to compute how old someone is chronologically, which makes sense as the first step. But then biologists quickly realized, well, this isn't nearly as powerful as estimating biological age. So like the disease risk and the mortality risk. So the original Horvath test and the chronological age estimation is good for a crime scene investigation where there's blood left by a suspect and you want to approximate how old that suspect was, right? But in the case of health and wellness, we want to understand if lifestyle interventions and prescription drugs or over-the-counter natural substances, if they're having favorable or unfavorable effects on biological age. So the way that they have been used very well and powerfully is in cohorts, in studies, where you've got a large group of people, of hundreds or thousands of people, and that is very powerful to determine whether what is being studied is having a positive effect or a negative effect. Where it gets more controversial with scientists is whether you can apply that same methodology to an individual, an N equals 1.
Yes.
What I would say is that there are issues potentially when it comes down to the accuracy. I shouldn't even say the accuracy, the precision, technically, right? So while these can be accurate, precision is like if you take the same blood test, the same blood, and then you run the test over and over again, how much does it vary? And even something like a cholesterol test with the same blood sample, it's going to vary every time you run it through the machine. So the amount that it varies is a measure of precision. And there is some degree of precision that you got to consider when you're running these multiple tests. So what I tend to say, and the way I look at it, is that if I'm taking multiple tests over a certain time frame, if I am going beyond the precision metric, which is known as an ICC, so if let's just say it varies 3% test to test, if I'm going beyond 3% and my score has improved by 5% or 8%, that means that the changes I've made in my lifestyle are more than likely leading to better health. And if it goes the opposite direction, then it tells me the changes I've made are more than likely leading to worse health. And if it's within that 3% margin, I can come to no conclusion. It's neither good nor bad.
Yes. So I was thinking about this as you were talking, and then you just really gave me the segue. Those lifestyle changes, and I know that you were able to achieve a biological age that's 13.6 years younger than your chronological age. And so I'm all over that. I want to hear exactly what you did. But before we do that, can you share, are there any factors that's, above 3%, 5% or more that you would say would cause you to age faster than others, like negatively impact your biological age? And what would maybe your top 3 things be?
Sure. So I can tell you both based on scientific studies and anecdote. And when I say anecdote, I'm basing this on the fact that my company has thousands of customers who report their results and give us feedback and so on. So we can see some patterns here. And there's one thing that really stands out to improve the biological age, which obviously if you don't do it can lead to a worse biological age outcome. And that is, for some people, they'll push back on this, and other people will say, yeah, 100%. It is the amount of vegetables they're eating. More vegetables is leading to better biological age
Bring it down,
results.
calm down.
You should see me. I'm like, it's a doctor of clinical nutrition. I love this, Dr. Mike.
Yeah.
Come on, food.
I was hoping he was going to say. I was hoping he was going to say it was barbecue.
Let me
but I
tell
know
you.
that's the opposite.
Listen, I said some people are going to hate it because there are some people who insist on only eating barbecue food, that's the healthiest thing, and skip all vegetables. But I don't think the research pans out.
It's the basic. It's so simple, and I think that's the beauty of it all. It's not this special. It's not running and exercising. Your life away.
But here, I'm
it's
going to tell
your
you.
diet.
I'm going to tell you where I'm at with all this.
Okay.
This is because it's difficult when it's difficult to measure an increase in lifespan when you can't study people for 100 years.
Oh, well, of course.
Right. That's really what is and that's why we have to use animal models, right? Because they don't live as long, so it's easier. And then we try to extrapolate and do all this, but they're still mice. They're not humans. We know in general what happens in humans, but we don't even know what's happening in you. But we're gonna extrapolate from mice, and that's one of the big issues. And so, I think the best we can say is if you're biological, like for you, Chris, you are definitely doing things that are leading to a healthier
for him
life for you. But does that still? When will we be able to say that absolutely means 15 more years added to your life? That's the big question, and I think we'll get there. I just don't know if we're there yet. Right? What do you think, Chris?
Any research with twins? I would say that's the closest to me comparison to have a clone of yourself, and then this person is living this lifestyle. This person's not, and then looking at their biological age. I don't know.
Well, I know, but
you're here.
I would say you would want to look at how they're living, but only look at lifespan, because the question is biological age. Does it correlate to lifespan?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
This
What
is-
are your thoughts?
Yeah.
Chris,
The
these are
big
great questions. These are
They-
the things that are being debated and talked about, right? I mean,
Fantastic questions. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and to your point that we need to look to animal models, that is the reason why we have epigenetic tests in the first place and why scientists are investing so much into refining these algorithms and improving these algorithms and going beyond just the epigenome and looking to the proteome. The proteome, I would say, has even more hope and potential behind it than even the epigenome does. We started there and we have the most research there, but I think the proteome offers even more possibilities because the proteome shows the actual proteins, and some proteins are inflammatory, some proteins are building blocks, some proteins are hormones. Like proteins are basically what's doing the functions in our body, at least the majority of the functions in our bodies. That's what pharmaceutical drugs target. They target protein receptors, so they behave like proteins, right? So proteins can tell us an enormous amount. That includes peptides, by the way, enormous amount about our biology and our health, and if our body is secreting inflammatory proteins or peptides, and so on. So I think that we're only getting started in this domain of biological age tests and looking at the omics. What I would also say is that to your question about, will we ever be able to tell, like, all right, you've got, another 15 years to live, or you've added 15 more years to your life. All of this is based on data, right? And so it's always going to be statistics. You can never guarantee that you're going to catch 100% of cases. Maybe something just suddenly leads to a mutation and that turns cancerous, and that happens overnight because of you, I don't know, inhaling a chemical somewhere that you never know what's going to happen. But what we can do is, at least to a high degree of statistical significance, tell you whether the decisions you're making are leading to a higher likelihood of that extra 15 years or a lower likelihood of those extra 15 years. And I think for most people, that's all that they really need. Like, a lot of people don't even want to know, like, I don't want to know if I've got 10 years left or 50 years left in my life. I want to just know, am I maximizing my health span and my lifespan potential? And are the decisions I'm making working towards that or working against it? That's what I want to know.
That's a good answer. Let's get practical. We already know, but we learned about vegetables. So what? Like, give the listener some practical things they can do, regardless of what their biological age is right now, that will help improve it.
Sure. So I tend to categorize these things. I think in terms of, we can start with nutrition. So when it comes to nutrition, we want to consider what types of foods we're eating. So that includes the vegetables, for example, but also how much we're eating. We don't want to overindulge. So generally speaking, eating less is going to lead to better health outcomes. Now, there are exceptions, people with medical conditions and eating disorders and so on. We're not talking about those situations, but we're talking about most people who tend to overindulge. Eating less is going to lead to more favorable health outcomes. In fact, back to the animal studies, the most effective way to extend lifespan more than anything else, more than any prescription drug, even more than genetic modification in mice, has been calorie restriction. Yeah. So that goes a long way. So it's not just what you're eating, but it's how much you're eating, and even potentially circadian rhythm, like when you're eating. Mm-hmm. So after nutrition, I would say it's activity. Activity is, to your point, it's not about necessarily like running the marathon and lifting too much weight and so on. Although I'm guilty of exercising a lot, it's more because it's a passion of mine. When you look at the longest lived people, I was just in Sardinia's blue zone last month. I went high up into the mountains. I met with the mayor of the town, and I really got a tour of the lifestyle and so on. What's clear is that these people living past 100 years old, they're not in the gym pumping iron. They don't have gyms. Right. They're just walking up and down the hills. Like it's in a mountain. These hills are crazy steep, and you see a 105-year-old walking up a hill that you will not find any 105-year-old here in the you won't find a 60-year-old here walking up that hill, right? So that is critical. Like they are getting into these higher heart rates, like zone 2 or zone 3, all the way into late life, and it's consistent every day. They're out there doing this. So it's not necessarily about overdoing it. In fact, if you are overdoing it, like marathons, you can cause excess oxidative stress, and it can actually be a bad thing for you. So it's about balance. So I'd say physical activity. For those who are not very active, there's hope. What I would say is that there's a magic number, just about 20 minutes. Technically in the study, it was about 21 minutes. You can get roughly about 60% of the lifespan benefits in terms of preventing things like cardiovascular disease from just 21 minutes a day of brisk walking. You want your heart rate to get up, and that is really not that much, right? That much to ask. So that's physical activity. Next is recovery. I group within recovery sleep, making sure not only are you getting high quality sleep, but that you're also getting obviously the right quantity, and you're having regular bedtimes and wake times. There are recent studies that have found that even if you extend your sleep so that you're getting the same amount, if you're varying the time you go to sleep each night, like one night it's 10 o'clock and you get 8 hours, and then another time it's midnight and you get 8 hours, it's actually oftentimes leading to worse health outcomes than if you went to bed at 10 o'clock every single night, and even some nights you missed the 8 hours and you only got 7. You're still healthier in that case than varying the bedtime.
Love that. That's the circadian rhythm.
Yeah, I'm good at that. I got a strict, you know me.
I know you are.
Every day.
Okay, so those are good. So we have 3, maybe a couple more.
Sure. Another one. Go ahead.
I was just going to say something real quick. When it comes to the marathon and all that kind of stressing, long time ago, Chris, I talked to a Japanese anti-aging, one of the original, and they called him Dr. Joe. I can't remember I couldn't even pronounce his name anyways, but he was so funny. He goes, don't run a marathon, take a nap. He goes, your heart only has so many beats in a lifetime. I just thought that was fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, give us 2 more.
That's a good one, but I'll counter that and say that the funny thing is that although your heart rate rises while you're running, and he's right about the number of heartbeats that you can have, by running, you're making your heart stronger. So when you're resting, you're taking fewer beats. So you have a lower heart rate. And then in total, you end up being like your heart beating less because you have exercised in the end, right?
I think he was just kind of kidding a little bit, but because it was true, because there was a time in early anti-aging research where napping was really studied. And I think that's kind of where the groupie came from.
Oh.
Anyways, okay.
Yeah, and a lot of centenarians do take naps. And so on that same theme of like recovery, let's throw stress into it. And what I'd say is it's not about reducing the stress in your life unless it's overwhelming. It's more about being able to cope with stress in your life, right? So it's not about, so to speak, like being a snowflake where you can't deal with any stress in your life, right? It's about being able to deal with that stress from a healthy mindset, because stressors can be hormetic, right? By getting a little bit of a stress, we see it in exercise. You exercise, you're putting stress on your body, you come back stronger. Same thing applies to psychological stress. You have a little bit more stress day after day. If it's in tiny little pieces, you can deal with more and more stress. So it's really about how you manage stress in your life. If you can't eliminate the stressor, then figure out a way to better manage it. That can be in the form of meditation, prayer, social circles, and so on. Which brings me to the final point is social circles. So one thing that was like very clear when I was in Sardinia was how incredibly close the community is to one another. And as we're walking through the town, the mayor and the hotel owner that I was with, they were talking to everyone. They knew everyone. Everyone knew each other. They're asking about their family, about their kids, about their parents, their grandparents, and so on. And that is not very common in the United States. What's also very common there is this respect for their elders, to the point that they call all of the centenarians their aunts and their uncles, even if they're not related. And what's important about this is not only, for your own sake and being able to feel connected with people, and of course you can find wisdom from older people, but also for those older people. When those older people are connected with younger people, that's going to improve their health and their purpose in their life. So if you've got a 90-year-old who's looking after the great grandchild who's 5 years old or 2 years old, that brings so much life and purpose to that 90-year-old. That person's going to live that much longer. And I'm not just saying, this isn't really spiritual. I mean, look at the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. The people who survived the Holocaust were those with purpose, right? There is something real. And we all know it, that when someone loses a spouse, when they're very old and they lose a spouse, they oftentimes die within a year or two themselves, right? Because they've lost purpose. So purpose does pay off.
That social connection is really good. I think it was I saw it in Switzerland or something, that there was a retirement home in the same building as a kindergarten. And they used to have a place in the middle where they would meet like once a day. And each child was assigned like an older person. And it was really cute seeing that. Chris, this has been fantastic.
Amazing, yes.
Really appreciate the information. How can our listeners learn a little bit more about what you're doing?
Sure. So there's a couple of ways. One is my own channels. So I've got on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, an account called Slow My Age. And I'm also at a website, slowmyage.com. And then my company that specializes in longevity from the perspective of these mechanisms of aging is called NOVOS. So it's novoslabs.com. And we're also on all of the social networks as NOVOS Labs.
Fantastic, Chris. Thanks for coming on. We really appreciate your time. As we said, this was great information.
Of course. Thanks for having me, guys.
Now, don't forget, you can go to liveforeverish.com, and there are a bunch of other episodes there, Dr. Crystal, where they can download, like, and share, and comment. And please, give us a review. That's what everybody does now.
Yes. Oh,
we need reviews.
And you can watch the video version of our podcast at youtube.com/Life Extension Wellness.
All right. And then our sponsor, Life Extension, wants to say thank you with the discount code podcast. Go over to lifeextension.com, put your cart together, put in podcast, and what will they get, Dr. Crystal?
10% off, $50 or more, plus free shipping and handling.
I'm Dr. Mike. That's
Dr. Crystal.
Thanks for listening.